second to know anything about quantum physics, folks, but I do know that it's been proven, relatively proven by people like Einstein, that there certainly might exist other dimensions of time and space that run parallel to ours. And I think this is a good illustration of, there's a fabric of time and space, and we fit somewhere neatly into that particular fabric of time and space, but who's to say that sometimes the wires don't get crossed, and things do move into other realms of existence or dimensions where they aren't, normally found. So, very good point. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
You mentioned about that military experiment where they had a robot walk through town. I'm just wondering if any of these are possibly, versions of drones or something that they're testing against to see what effect they have on the population. When you talk about the red eyes and the mechanical sounds, clickings and things that might be
highly possible. There are a number of conspiracy theories out there that relate to these flying humanoids like Mothman. Some people feel that the entire Mothman episode was a government mind-washing experiment, and basically they took an isolated community like Point Pleasant and they basically implanted this collective vision of this Mothman creature just to see how they could manipulate people. But yeah, certainly that is possible. That is a recurring theme. There are some accounts in the book where I talk about some of these flying humanoid beings that appear to have these silver metallic wings that they're operating with a control panel on their chest. That pops up a few times as well. So certainly a possibility. Yes, ma'am.
Didn't they find some footprints of, one of these creatures and all that? They couldn't have come from anywhere else. A Bigfoot, for example.
Oh, Bigfoot? Oh, yeah. Well, they've found many, many footprints of Bigfoot, the Yeti, and some of those. As far as the flying humanoids go, there have been allegations of. There's one particular case I write about in the book where some footprints were found, but this was a very long time ago. But unfortunately, there really is no physical evidence that these creatures exist. Now, I guess you could point to some of those videotapes that I was showing earlier. From a scientific perspective, that's not physical evidence. It's highly subjective, but that's what we really lack in this particular situation. Yes, sir.
With birds, they migrate. So what's to say that a lot of these sightings are a creature that will migrate from one continent maybe to another continent, and the sightings are obviously a little bit distorted between different people seeing different things and different beliefs in that place, so they come up with different visions of it and stuff. But similar beings that just have migrated around the world at various times. Is there any kind of research into that?
I haven't found any patterns with relation to that. There seem to be some hot spots. Obviously, Point Pleasant is kind of a ground zero, so to speak, in terms of the flying humanoid phenomenon. I mentioned the owl man is always sighted in the same location. Other than that, Texas, California, England, Iowa, strangely, and Poland and Russia. Those are some of the areas where you have a kind of a predominant number of reports, but I haven't been able to find any specific patterns.
Well, based on what he was saying, is there a correlation between the times of the year or seasons when these things are seen more than others, or has anybody done any research?
Not really. I mean,
times of the day?
Generally speaking, there seem to be a lot of weird reports that happen during the summer months.
Okay.
And there's kind of a joke within the Fortean field that it's kind of like the crazy season, because it seems like June, July, August, that's when the really weird stuff starts to surface. But, for example, Mothman, a lot of the sightings were during the winter, so. Tom?
During the time of the Mothman, were there any other reports or sightings outside of Point Pleasant in the West Virginia area? Or was it all concentrated just in the Point Pleasant area?
There was one sighting of a Mothman-type figure that took place in Alabama about a month, I believe a month or two before the Mothman hysteria took place. But, obviously I published as many accounts as I could, but for example, Jeff Walmsley, who runs the Mothman Museum, he gets emails from people all over the world on a regular basis, and I imagine he's just got massive amounts of files that I don't have. So I'm not aware of any specific cases, Tom, but I'm sure it's possible. So there was someone over here. You, sir.
Are there any particular idiosyncrasies that an observation would have in common? For example, would it happen more often in the spring? Would it happen more often at cold temperatures, at hot temperatures? it might be associated with some naturally occurring hallucinogen.
Absolutely, and that, I discussed that in the book, that, there are a number of other explanations other than the fact that these things are actually visiting us. Certainly there are cases of mass hysteria. There are people that suffer from, different types of psychoses, hallucinations, and so forth. But the really frustrating thing about this particular mystery is that there really are no discernible patterns. And as a quasi-scientist, that's very frustrating to me, because that's one of the things that we really look for in terms of dealing with any type of phenomenon. So it's actually vastly different from, again, the Bigfoot phenomenon, where many, many researchers for many years have been compiling data, and we can almost discern some types of patterns, but none with the flying humanoids. Yes, sir.
Initially, I think I conflate the flatwoods monster with the ones that were metallic and they shot into them.
Mm-hmm.
The sheriff did not take them seriously. An account that I read, it claimed they were drunk. And when he went back in, he said, "You don't know what they're drinking out there." So I think that was the one where they were in the trees.
Mm-hmm.
One hung down.
Yeah, that's the Hopkinsville case. Well, I mean, there were many, many people there. It was the Sutton family was the name of the family. And there were several adults that claimed to have seen these creatures. But most of the children that were there were actually huddled under the bed. They kind of hid the children under the bed. And I've seen a good documentary on that particular case, where they actually have interviewed some of these children as adults. And they basically said, well, I never saw these creatures, but I could tell by what I was hearing that my parents were just literally in a state of hysteria, whatever was happening. So it's a cool case. No, sir. You'll be next, Daniel. Sorry.
I just talked to Geraldine Sutton, one of those.
Oh, okay, one of the Suttons.
Last weekend, and she did express that they weren't drunk. I mean, this comes up all the time, and those guys drank. I mean, they weren't guys that didn't drink, but
they live in Kentucky, sure. Oh, am I stereotyping? Oh, they got good whiskey there.
Those guys can drink moonshine and still shoot a deer at 100 yards.
They probably offered them a drink. That's what they came down for.
Maybe they did.
We drink tequila. Daniel.
There are some videos circulating on the internet recently of what seem to be depicted as flying dragon type creatures all around the world, and I was going to see if you happen to be familiar with these accounts or know anything about their authenticity.
Flying dragons, like out of Dragon Slayer type, Rain of Fire type.
Several videos of viral around. That's possibilities.
If anyone wants to pick up my first book, Flying Pterodactyls in Texas, to me that's the closest thing I've ever heard of that's similar to a dragon. But there's also many researchers feel that maybe these different entities are actually projections from us. Are we capable of creating things from our unconscious minds and giving them a physical nature? Maybe.
Do you think it's a coincidence that there's a lot of movies coming out now to do with medieval times, dragons and stuff like that? More of these movies, I mean, it's becoming more popular, I suppose. That's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
More people are into that now, as 50 years ago, people thought it was all taboo and stuff. But it seems some kind of realism. It's like there's a part of it which is kind of fantasy, there's a part of it which is fascination, there's a part of it that we actually relate to too, as humans. So, it's kind of something that's with us kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But in the old days, it was all taboo, and you couldn't speak about it, you couldn't talk about it, If you mentioned it, like I said, you were drunk, stupid, or someone would say you was a, local drunk or whatever. But there's a fascination now that we can't deny that's there. And I think that's part of who we really are, because we're reaching out to there's that wanting to know where we come from, that kind of stuff, what we relate to and stuff like that. And we relate to these things too. It's like they're part of us, and I don't think it's more of what I'm trying to say. It's not more fantasy anymore. There's more that realism that does exist.
Mm-hmm. Like we gave it life, so to speak?
Yeah.
You're actually, what you just kind of laid out there is basically Jungian philosophy. If you're familiar with Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, that we're all a part of a collective global consciousness, and that all of these things, dragons, things like Bigfoot, have been with us, always, and that we basically, they're somehow related to us in terms of, again, we're giving them life, so to speak, because we sort of, we perceive that they're there. Yes?
So my question is probably going to sound a little cynical. Then, sorry, horse.
That's okay.
So why is it that with that collective consciousness, people that are in, you know, back to Texas or something, see Big Feet more than somebody in like Dallas or Houston or something like that? Like, you would think that as much as we're spreading out and basically ripping out our forest and everything, that we will say that people in a more bigger numbers would see it minus just one person or maybe 3 to the most.
Yeah,
Is
no.
there any big numbers of like 50 people saw this and that's why?
Well, there's one account in my book of a bat-winged humanoid creature that apparently flew over Coney Island, New York in the beginning of the 20th century that was seen by 100 or so people. But unfortunately, newspaper articles from that time period, you know, you have to be a little skeptical of that, because oftentimes I think rather than just simply reporting facts, they were sort of trying to sell newspapers. But that's a good point, you know. But you know, a lot of that may play back into perception again. You know, this is just a personal kind of, well, I don't have my phone handy. This is just a personal opinion, but I fear that as a society, as a species, that we're losing our abilities to perceive, and that's because everyone is walking around like this now. You know, the Mothman could be flying right over your head, and you're texting your friend, you know. People that live out in the woods and rural areas, they're more acclimated, they're more a part of the environment, you know, as you know. They have very keen senses, they have a very good awareness. I think people that tend to live in more urban environments, maybe we're losing some of that, unfortunately. A couple more. We'll go you and then you.
Is there any particular relationship between things we're more familiar with, like crop circles or even the UFO craft, and have there been any stories you're aware of where one of these creatures did a positive, loving, maybe even healing thing with some human being, or that went on for a long time?
Oh, that's a great question. There is one story that I write about in my book, known as, referred to as the Angel of Ecuador. And in this remote mountain village in Ecuador, so the story goes, there was a boy and a girl that were playing on this cliff, and they started to lose their footing, and they were like falling off the cliff, and they were literally hanging on to this branch on the side of a cliff. And they claimed that suddenly this white-winged human-like creature swept down and grabbed them and rescued them and laid them back on the cliff. So, I mean, there are, you know, and of course angels, you know, if you believe that angels are winged beings, so yeah. But for the most part, unfortunately, it seems like these creatures are perceived generally as, you know, negative energy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one comment about what people see. I know in North Texas, like around North Richland Hills and Watauga and whatnot, people were complaining about they were seeing like mountain lions or bobcats. Mm-hmm. And you know, the authorities said no, that's, you know, all these people said no, that's not possible. And that went on for a while until somebody caught it on videotape. That set up I guess a surveillance system and caught a bobcat going across their yard. But now my question is, with the Mothman prophecy, it was almost like a harbinger of disaster when this thing was showing up before the bridge fell in. But are there any other cases like that where these winged creatures would show up in an area and then something bad would happen, or is that just an anomaly?
Well, many people have associated the Jersey Devil with that type of, although there's nothing specific. I did one television show recently where unfortunately they made allegations that Mothman-type creatures were seen before 9/11 over New York, that they were seen before Chernobyl in Russia, and the Fukushima. I haven't found any tangible evidence that any of that's ever happened. I think that's just something that's kind of been fabricated or invented, so. Yes, sir.
I just have a closing observation.
Okay.
It seems that these phenomena are directly proportional to the inavailability of a camera and the signal strength of a phone.
That's good. I can't argue that. Okay, so.
Don't you know the National Football League would like to have a Sasquatch? Make a linebacker out of him. He's be a first-round draft pick.
With all due respect, sir, I think Sasquatch would be a right tackle.
Whatever.
But okay, guys. I'm going to be right here. If anyone has any other questions or comments, I'd love to meet you, you know, face to face, shake your hand, and talk about this stuff some more. Ken, thank you.